Welcome to the Waterways Speaker Series. My name is Ryan Keller. I'm a board member of Riverscape, a nonprofit organization dedicated to transforming the riverfront. For nearly 15 years, Riverscape has focused on the beautification and redevelopment of the Wabash River corridor in Vigo County. Riverscape is pleased to bring Waterways to West Terre Haute, one of 6 small towns in Indiana selected to host the exhibit. Waterways is a Smithsonian Institute traveling exhibition that reveals the central nature of water in our lives. It is made possible by the Museum on Main Street partnership between the Smithsonian and Indiana Humanities, with support from many local community partners and volunteers. Alongside the Smithsonian display, Riverscapes host a companion exhibit, Pearls of the Wabash, which explores the local community's history and relationship to the Wabash River. The exhibit will be at the Vigo County School Corporation Administration Building located at 501 West Olive Street in West Terre Haute through January 2nd of 2022. We're excited to also offer this Waterways Speaker Series, which taps regional experts on the local history, life, and health of the Wabash Rivershed in partnership with Vigo County Public Library. A small update and change in our schedule. Dr. Michelle Mariancel Payne's removal of stormwater pollutants using constructed treatment wetlands session has been rescheduled for Thursday, December 9th at 6 p.m. It was originally scheduled for December 20th. So please note that change in the schedule. Today's speaker series is titled Waters of the Wabash, Adventures Along Indiana's Famous River. It's presented by Kathryn Mudica and Katelyn Rusiniak. Mudica, I'm sorry, I said that incorrectly.
You just put us together.
I totally did. I'm so sorry. Kathryn Mudica and Katelyn Rusiniak. Kathryn is a PhD candidate under Dr. Jennifer Latimer. She is working in Biogeochemistry Lab of the Earth and Environmental Science Department at Indiana State University. Her research focus is metal containment in Indiana's river systems and the use of biotic indicators to determine water quality. Katelyn is a senior at Indiana State University, majoring in chemistry and biology. Since her freshman year, she has been researching water quality in the Earth and Environmental Systems Department and loves fieldwork opportunities it provides. Without further ado, it is your turn. Here is your mic. Thank you.
I'm Kathryn. This is Katelyn. Hello. So, as our introduction said, I am a PhD candidate, and my focus is water quality. So, one of the things that I look at is freshwater food webs. So, I'm very conscious of what's happening in an ecosystem that is not what is picked up by fixed water monitoring stations and things that we're able to kind of get online and take a look at. So Katelyn and I focus a lot on the hidden things, the things that you wouldn't necessarily see, the things that continuous water monitoring wouldn't necessarily pick up, and the things that maybe are bypassing systems that are issues within the river system. So a little about me personally is I actually grew up along the St. Joe River in northern Indiana. And when I say grew up on the river, I grew up on the river. So I've been kayaking, canoeing, and boating since I was about 8 years old. My father recently sent me my first life jacket. It was this big. And so water has always been near and dear to my heart. I moved here to Terre Haute about 15 years ago and was shocked that people don't utilize the Wabash River. And so it just, water and water quality has always intrigued me and been kind of part of my DNA.
So kind of going off what Kathy said about how people don't really utilize the Wabash. So I grew up in Northwest Indiana in St. John. And there isn't, like, we have the lake, but you don't like go swimming in the lake deep in it. And so When I came down here, I was all excited because Wabash is right there. And I remember going on a tour of Indiana State, and I'm like, oh my gosh, do you guys have like a kayak thing? Or is it like a thing for students to go out and go on the Wabash? And the girl giving the tour is like, that's not the kind of river you do that kind of stuff in. It's gross, it's dirty, all this stuff. I'm like, oh, I guess it's, some gross river. And then I started in the lab with Kathy, and she got a boat a year or two ago. And we started on the Wabash, and at first I'm like, I don't want to put my feet in the water, it's gross. And now I will go out and bathe in the water. So it's not the gross, dirty river that some people in this area kind of make it out to be.
So we came up with the idea this summer. Like Katelyn said, I got a boat. The boat was small enough and had a shallow enough engine that we could go anywhere we wanted on the Wabash. So, born of great ideas, we decided to go anywhere we wanted on the Wabash.
So this is how far we have traveled. So this is Site 1 in Huntington. And then all the way down here, I forget the name of the town, but it's got like a Russellville, a population of 100, right? And here's on the bigger picture, this is where we started, this is where we have gone so far. So every Tuesday we go out, drive up to wherever our inn was at. I'd park at the out, she'd park at the inn. We go down the river for the 20 miles or 50 miles, take my car back to her car, and then drive home.
So we decided to make this a research project. First of all, because we're students and we're poor. And second of all, we needed funding. So from the Department of Earth and Environmental Systems, we were given a gas credit card. So we could do anything we wanted involving the gas credit card. So we actually really had very little race support, very little support. And Katelyn and I were driving to the put-ins and driving to the takeouts. So one of the reasons that we went on Tuesdays is because as students we had other obligations that we had to do. We were also in a very small boat collecting samples every 5 miles. So by the time that we were done with a day, we had a boat full of samples. And we were pretty weighted down, so we were kind of stuck being able to go in and out of the river. That was our plan. So as she said, we've gone from Huntington to Russellville. That's about 300 miles of the river. We plan to finish the river as soon as it stops being the Wabash. I don't know if you guys are familiar with what happens in the wintertime, but the Wabash is the longest undammed river east of the Mississippi. So right now, it does what it wants. And in fact, Monday, it was at 7 feet at Terre Haute. Tuesday, it was at 9 feet. And it's at 7 again today. So getting on a river that's gonna raise 2 feet in one day is not safe. So we've done a lot of not safe things, but I draw the line in killing Katelyn before I'm done with my PhD. I need her. So we started paddling in a whitewater canoe that my father made. So I went up to Elkhart, I picked up the canoe. It's probably a 40-year-old canoe. But we were lucky because within about 20 minutes of being on the river for the very first time when we put in Huntington, now I've been on whitewater, that's a whitewater kayak, so I know what I'm looking at. And up ahead, I see whitewater. So I'm panicking. So I have Katelyn in the boat, teaching her to paddle, and I see whitewater up ahead. And so in the area of the northern part, between Huntington, Wabash, and Peru, the river is a very different river. It's still about 5 feet deep, just like we're used to here in Terre Haute, but it's actually a very narrow river, almost like a creek.
How much vertical drop was with that whitewater?
It was actually rock gardens, what we were running into. So it wasn't really a vertical drop. It was more of, oh my goodness, it's a lot of limestone. So in this area, you don't see the clay bottom. You actually see solid limestone. You see a lot of pits in the limestone from the current, and you see a lot of large boulder-sized rocks sticking up out of the water.
And this area too is where it was our most social. So we had Kathy's partner Nick with us, and he was in a little one-man kayak. And I kind of felt bad because we were in a canoe, we were tugging along, and he was just going as hard as he could to keep up. And then you can see here, we had two kind of famous people that we were able to paddle with. These people, John and Lene Abnett, have paddled from the beginning of the Wabash all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. So Kathy messaged him on Instagram one day and was like, hey, would you like to paddle with us? This would be great. And they met up from our, what was it, Wabash to Peru? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we went from Wabash to Peru with them, just hearing about their experiences and their 3 months on the water, like camping, and then just keep paddling all day. It was really excellent, and they're really great people. So we met some new friends. It was a lot of fun. So, our data collection. Kathy made these little kits, which are really genius. We have a Tupperware where we put our macros in, and this is me taking macros. So we have this kick net, and you kind of go out to a shallow, fertile area, I guess I could call it. So macros are little bugs that live in the water, and they breathe dissolved oxygen. And by collecting them and getting a number of them, you could assign values to them. So mosquitoes have a value of 3, meaning that they are moderately tolerant to pollution. And caddisflies have a value of 1, meaning that they can't handle any pollution at all. So you could get all these bugs together, assign values to them, and have an idea of what the dissolved oxygen is in the water. So you go out to a little place, they like shallow areas, they like areas that have a lot of wood, and they like to cling to the wood. So you go out there, kick about 3 minutes, and then we would dump them in there, pour ethanol on them. And then we have our meters here. So we have dissolved oxygen, conductivity, temperature, pH, I'm missing one. Dissolved solids. So we take all that, write in our little notebook, and then this is kind of hard to see, but we have water samples. We take 4 water samples. We have floodplain and sediment, and we take 2 of each. And so data collection, we'd stop every 5-10 miles, take those samples, and we'd end up with about 5 or 10 a day, and we had this big bucket we'd carry them in, and we'd take it back to the lab and process them. So here's what a day in the lab looks like. So this is only a couple of machines that we'd work with every day, except for Tuesdays, because that was field work day. But the water, I'd put 1 milliliter of nitric acid in it to suspend any of the heavy metals in there. And then I'd freeze dry the sediment and the floodplain samples. And then these guys I'd just pick through, look under a microscope, assign the values, put it in a Excel sheet. And so once the soil and the water were fully processed, I'd put them through the ICP. And this, we turn whatever we have into liquid, injects it into a plasma feed, and then we could tell how much of whatever element we told it to look for. So we could get an idea of the heavy metal pollutions in there. This is our mercury analyzer, and I'm analyzing boats of water, but we could also use soil on it, and there's metal boats. And that tells you how much mercury is in each sample. And then we would use an XRF, which isn't pictured, but it's just an X-ray gun, and it tells you of how much each metal is in there. So that was the rest of my week. And that was kind of a timely, tedious process, but I also liked it as well.
Is there a lot of mercury in the Wabash?
There is later on. Yeah, there is. In different spots, like up north, I didn't get a whole lot, but down south it's starting to accumulate a little more, and I'm seeing a lot of it in the water and the sediment.
So Katelyn and I spent a year on the river going between Clinton and Darwin Ferry. We kind of know that area like the back of our hand now before we ever started doing this full trip along the entire Wabash. So if anybody has been anywhere near the Wabash, they've seen an eagle. So you definitely know eagles like this area. So after 300 miles of the Wabash River, I think that Katelyn was ready to slap my phone out of my hands because I would take pictures of the eagles. I would probably not be able to count how many eagle pictures I have. So then we became entertained with the other wildlife. So in the northern part of the Wabash River, one of the main things that you see are kingfishers. And they're definitely the tattletales. So the kingfishers would let every single thing alive in the river know we were there before we ever got there. And they would just follow us. So we started out in a canoe. We were going about 10 to 15 miles a day. And so for 15 miles, we would have a kingfisher following ahead of us. They're here, there's people. So we didn't see a lot of wildlife, but we definitely saw a lot of eagles. And because we started in May, one of the best things we saw was wood ducks and their babies. So those were one of my favorite things to see, is the wood ducks and their babies. And I would stop paddling, put my paddle down, and begin taking pictures. And Katelyn, there's a wood duck. So a little bit about mussels. Because Riverscape really was focusing on mussels, I wanted to talk a little bit about mussels. So one of the things that I've been allowed to do, and I'm very grateful, is collect freshwater mussel shells along the Wabash River. So I've collected for 300 miles. I'm very limited to what I can collect, how many and which sites I can collect, but I've been able to collect a few at each of our sites that we looked at water quality samples. And so I've also been able to do some work on the metals that we found in the mussel shells. So one of the things that I can tell you is between Huntington and Lafayette, where most of the river is shallow and there is not a lot of sediment issues. And when I say sediment, I mean clay. There's not as much clay issues as you see in this area where we're used to. So there's not the high banks. There's not the big cuts of mud that we normally see. You see a lot of live freshwater mussels in that area, physically in the Wabash. In fact, this is a really good picture of a pimpleback that was just right there as we landed. So we would land to take water quality samples, and there would be mussel beds right there visible where you could see them. And so I did do some geochemistry on a few of the mussels in Tippecanoe County. And I'm sure that you guys can probably imagine why I would focus on Tippecanoe County. So Lafayette is right there. Now, despite the fact that Riverscape in Lafayette has a very good reputation for trying to take care of the river, Lafayette doesn't have a history of that before. So these mussels can live 50 to 70 years, and some of these shells could be dead for several years before I even came across them. So one of the things that I saw quite a bit of is lead and barium, which is no surprise. Those are both coal-fired power plant and industrial pollutants. And so the mussel shells in Tippecanoe County are picking up quite a bit of metals. Now, whether that's affecting them or not, I can't really say. But I can say that there is mussels there, and the mussels do have some trace metal issues.
So to continue on with Lafayette and presenting data, so Lafayette, about I'd say 10 miles ahead of there is when it switches from kind of a half limestone, half sand, half clay to just full-on limestone, like this photo. Oh, it's supposed to be a video. Oh well. So some interesting things I found from my ICP water data is that, and I have my graphs going from this is site 1 and then this is the end. And I did that because that's the way the water flows. So here's site 1, where it's kind of like a mixture, and then here's right about where it switches to limestone. So you see that they are all above this background level. So that means it's an unsafe level that the NOAA set, which is like the CDC for water quality. So for iron, cadmium, and lead, all of them were above that background level before the limestone hit. And then after it hit the limestone, it went down to a safe level, even below levels of detection. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Cadmium, it is an industrial waste and it's from fertilizer and it could be toxic to you. Iron isn't, you don't think of that as a toxic thing, right? But if you have a lot of it, it can actually be toxic. And then lead, we all know why lead's bad. So I just thought that was an interesting finding that it had such a dramatic, sharp drop right when we hit the limestone.
And so the river does flow west to north until we hit this point. So that's the other interesting thing is you guys, this is where the river begins to flow south. And the fun begins. So when Katelyn and I were setting up this morning, one of the things that I had forgotten about, I probably have about 500 pictures of our trip, but part of our trip, we had all of the unseasonable rain. So normally in the summertime, you can get on the river, and you can be on the river just about all summer long. And if you go down to Fairbanks Park, there's at least 8 to 10 trailers where fishermen are out on the river. Well, the river went up to 22 and 25 feet in Terre Haute, which is well above flood stage, in the middle of the summer. So Katelyn and I spent a lot of time grounded and not going anywhere. So when we finally got back on the river, we were able to start in Lafayette, and our trip was to Covington. We were pretty excited to be back on the river until about 15 minutes in, and it began to rain. So because I'm the older person, I always have to be the responsible person, which is the best position to be in. So a lot of times I have to make a judgment call. Do we turn around and go back? Do we continue to go? Is the river gonna go up on us 2 or 3 feet while we're traveling? And are we gonna make it to the end before dark? And is Katelyn gonna speak to me again after today? So those are the kind of things that go through my mind, as you can see, while it was pouring rain on us. So the caption of this is, and then it stopped raining. So it rained on us until dusk. And when it finally quit raining, we were so happy and so excited. And we took our coats off, and we began to notice something hitting our face.
Oh, no.
Yeah. There were so many bugs on the river at this point at dusk that they were literally hitting our face as we were traveling through. So this is an example, like I said, the river is just as shallow in the northern parts. You can see we're starting to see more rocks, more clay, and the brown Wabash River that you're used to. And this is an example of some of the ways that we collect water. We have what's called a plankton net. And so we'll collect water samples through the plankton net to get as many diatoms and other primary producers as we possibly can as another way to assess water quality. So I can't talk about the Wabash River without talking about pipes in the water. So most of us believe pipes in the water are illegal, right? You see a pipe in the water, you're not supposed to have a pipe in the water. That's not actually true. A lot of people can be permitted to have a pipe in the water. If you build a parking lot near the river, you're going to want to have that water come off of the parking lot. So this is just a sampling of the pipes in the water that I saw. I could probably do an hour talk of pipes in the water in the Wabash River. And I can tell you which cities in the 300 miles are the villains. So a lot of development along the river forces a pipe in the water. So you don't want an apartment complex that people park in the parking lot in a flood of water, and so it forces a pipe in the river. And then we have a lot of farmers who are still irrigating and running into the water. And so people get kind of creative. I think this one is my favorite. It's actually the roots of a tree causing the water to funnel naturally. So we have irrigation ditches that look like creeks. We have river fronts that just cause runoff to go right in. And then our pipes in the water.
Yeah, this was about the grossest place we took samples. Because
Yes.
we were kind of pressed, because usually we'll take samples when it gets to like a little sandy beach, right? And so it was cut banks on both sides for like 20 miles. We're like, okay, we need to stop and take samples. So we went into this little irrigation canal, and it was like, the water was black. There was just like old corn cobs floating around, and there was like things moving. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to stick my hand in that.
So definitely the Wabash still has some issues. So, too many permits, too many pipes in the water, too many historic pipes in the water. You see this one here, it's definitely a historic pipe in the water, but it is still draining water into the Wabash River. So anything that hits the ground is still going into the river. And we do, like I said, there's still an elephant in the room we need to be conscious of.
So another crazy thing that I'm like, this has to be illegal. This cannot be allowed. So in Cayuga, there's this big power plant. If you've driven north on 63, you've probably seen it, right? And I've passed by it 100 times going home, and I'm like, oh, cool. Didn't really realize it was on the river till we were on the river and we saw it. So the picture doesn't show, here's the flow of the river. Up this way is a creek. And they had the creek blocked off because they said they were like dredging or something. I'm like, that's kind of weird. No one really does that in a creek. All of a sudden I look down, 91 degrees. So you might think that's normal for the water, but there's another standard for water temperature. In the month that we were in, 88 was the highest the water could be without levels of concern. So that surpassed it by quite a bit. And the closer we were to that creek, the hotter the water got. And I don't think you can see in this photo, but you looked up and it was like a cyclone of turkey vultures and eagles. And turkey vultures and eagles are very opportunistic. So if they're gonna see a dead fish float in the water, they're gonna take it rather than hunt something. So that told me that they're dumping really, really hot water. All the fish kind of got shocked, floated up, and all these birds are coming down getting easy dinner. So that's another very concerning thing. And every time I drive past that power plant now, I get angry. I get mad at them because, yeah, you shouldn't be dumping that hot of water into the Wabash.
Is that illegal?
Yes. So they do have a certain water temperature, but realize, so 91 isn't the highest we read. 98 was the highest that my meter actually read, 1 mile down the Wabash River from the power plant.
And it's deep too. It's not like we're talking about this much water. Oh, it makes sense that might. No, it's 9 feet deep there. It's kind of ridiculous of how hot it can get.
Yep. So they do have how much hot water they can put in, how often they can put in hot water, and where they can put it in. So if they're putting it a mile up a creek, supposedly that's far enough that it's not going to have an impact. But it clearly has an impact on the Wabash River. So like I said, my expertise is finding what they're not telling you about the river. So besides the eagles, we saw lots of wildlife. So one of my favorite things to do was to see the wildlife. So you can see, despite the fact that the water's hot, the herons are still catching fish. And so we would get on the river usually just as daylight was breaking, and we were able to see lots of wildlife along the river. So wildlife does thrive despite some of the issues that the river has.
So this is probably my favorite story to tell about our time on the Wabash. So like we said before, we would usually just go out for a day, right? We'd do dawn to dusk on the Wabash, drive home. And we really wanted to do an overnight trip like how most people paddle the Wabash. They just go 2 weeks straight through. So we decided that we're going to start, where was it? Covington, go down to Clinton, take a little break, and then we're going to spend the night in Tecumseh and then finish out in Darwin Ferry. And it was close enough to home that we could have support if needed, and we had so many samples that we we gave them off to a friend of ours to bring back to the lab. So this is our camp we set up. We had 2 hammocks with a bug net, and when we were like beaching our boat and putting all of our supplies into this little camp, we were getting eaten alive by all sorts of flies, all sorts of mosquitoes. I had like scars on my legs for weeks after it because it was just so bad. I don't think I've ever used that much DEET in my life. And so we were getting eaten up, and then we see paw prints in the mud, and we're like, oh, we hope it's a dog. Because there's like some other like human activities that look like they went on. So we're like, okay, we hope that this was someone's dog and not a coyote. And then the sun's starting to set and we hear some howls, and we're like, it's a coyote. All right, great, we gotta worry about that all night. And so we set up our camp, we eat, we go in the Wabash, cool off, clean off a little bit. And then we come back and we're eating our dinner, and there's a fisherman coming by, like kind of as the sun's setting, and he's like, you know, dealing with his trot line. He turns around, he sees like two feral looking women just like spooning food into their mouths, and he's like, all right, turns and then quickly leaves. And so we're like, okay, we are the crazy woman of the Wabash. He's probably going to tell all of his buddies about that. So that was probably the worst night's sleep I've ever gotten. And that's not because like the hammock. Like I slept in a hammock in my own home for a couple of years. It's because I was so cold. I was just shivering all night long. There's howls happening. I thought I was tough, right? I was like, oh, I'm not scared of anything. There was a barred owl right above us, and he was doing his like really loud call, and I'm like, I'm never gonna sleep tonight. This is gonna be awful. And then there was bats, and oh gosh, I was so scared that night. And then we wake up, and that's how foggy it was. There was just so much humidity. Oh, I forgot. Another thing that I realized is a horrible thing to listen to all night. We were very close to the water, like, I don't know, about 100 feet out. And at night when the bugs hit, the grass carp will come up, eat the bugs, and flip their tail to go back down, right? Not a scary thing, but at night it sounds a whole lot like there's a herd of people splashing through the water to get to you. And so I'd like wake up in a cold sweat like every couple hours and be like, oh, it's just the carp. Okay, we could go back to bed. And so woke up in the morning, got packed up, and went back on the water. I ended up falling asleep on the boat, but.
This is the trip we ended with. And I was pretty sure I had lost Katelyn for good at this point because I had done things like bathe in the river, had the fishermen see us sort of clothed, and then the grass carp jumping wasn't the greatest. But it's definitely an experience. It's amazing to be out on the river where there's no lights, there's no people, and there's nothing but you and the river.
So we had some pretty cool encounters with animals. Some of them I really, really hated, and some of them I really liked. So I'll start with the ones that I really, really hated. Carp. So I think it was the same day, like the day after we spent the night in the Wabash, I encountered so many carp. And the thing you know about carp is they get like really agitated when they're in shallow water, and I think they like to hang out there too. So we had our motor running and we were like gonna go off to a bank to take samples or do whatever. They'd all just start jumping, and I, even like not years, but like 3 years ago when we were on the Wabash, that was like my fear. I did not want to get hit by a carp, and thankfully I have not yet, but oh gosh, they just scare you because all of a sudden you just have a bunch of things up in the water at once. And so later that day, I was like, you know what? I don't like these guys. I'm gonna fight back. So I had a paddle, and I was sitting in the like front seat in the boat. So Kathy was using the motor and whatnot. And I was just ready for one to jump out, and I was just gonna hit it like a baseball. And they must have heard me talking about it because none of them jumped after that. And then more up north on the Wabash, where not many people have houses out there, there's not a lot of industry, we saw some really cool stuff. So this is a little soft shell turtle, one little like pig nose. And we saw a ton of those little guys. You see like just a circle moving through the water, and it's a little baby turtle that just hatched. And we saw a bunch of turtle eggs that were on like the beaches and stuff. All sorts of little fish, all sorts of little critters. It was really cool. And this is one of my favorite pictures because I like turtles.
It's amazing to think they get this big. They're cute when they're little. Same as the Asian carp. So the Asian carp we actually don't start seeing until we get past Cayuga, close to Clinton. So that's where you start seeing the majority of them. Like Katelyn said, they like shallow, muddy areas. And I have seen them stay in the shallows of the river until the river goes down and they just lay there and die. So you would think that they wouldn't be able to take over an ecosystem like they can because they're not even smart enough to swim into deeper water, but they definitely managed to do it. This picture is from right by the waterworks here in Vigo County, right by the Big 4 train. And so that area has kind of a bend in the river, and it's a guarantee that there's Asian carp there. And so that's kind of a set picture. I had my camera ready and I buzzed the area so I could get a nice picture of the carp.
I thought that was vermilion, but. So another interesting thing that the Wabash provides is a lot of things of the past or things that have died. So this is the throat of an Asian carp. Another reason why I hate them, they have teeth in their throat. Gross. And so like Kathy said, they just kind of like face defeat when the water starts going low, and you'll just see a bunch of dead carp on a sandbar, a bunch of bones. So we would see stuff like this, or they have like, they're like near their gill is just this huge bone plate, and we'd see a lot of those too. So this is one of them that we've seen. And then this is Darwin, Illinois. They had a ferry there that would take you from the Indiana to the Illinois side, and there's a ferry, it flipped over and they just kind of left it. And then there's a Jeep. So we'd see a lot of weird abandoned things. In between Clinton and Terre Haute, there's a bus that is now fallen into the Wabash, but like a year ago, it was just hanging on the edge, just teetering there. It was really cool. And in that area, there's I think just a big junkyard that's being slowly eaten away by the Wabash. So you'll just see like a 1950 Bel Air in the water. So really crazy stuff that we've seen along the way. This was probably the coolest one because it was just a nice little sandbar. We could walk up to it and check it out. It was kind of funny because Kathy has a Jeep too. So she was going to take a picture of that and send it to her husband and be like, look, I put the Jeep in the water.
Oops.
Yeah.
I'm not the best boat backer upper and launcher and things like that. And so my husband, the times that he could go with us, he would. The times that he couldn't, he called. And so, yes, he would have gotten a kick out of the fact that he thought I put the Jeep in, and he would believe that was probably the Jeep. Most of you guys probably remember Darwin Ferry running. So this is about a mile from Darwin Ferry. So Darwin Ferry still exists. It's just upside down in the middle of the river now. So once you pass Darwin Ferry, it's a much, much bigger river. So we've gone from what's basically a 3-foot creek to now about a 6-foot deep and several feet wide river.
So what are our plans for the future? So as you saw on that map, the first thing we showed, we still have a little bit left at the end and a little bit left at the beginning. So in the spring, when the water is less up and down, we're gonna finish out, go to the Ohio River. I think that's about 3 trips worth.
Yep.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be too bad. And then we're going to, over our spring break, go up to Fort Recovery, hike as much as we can, and then we're gonna paddle quite a bit. And we're gonna do that with John and Lene Abbott, the people that we met on the Wabash. So we're looking forward to that. Hopefully weather doesn't ruin it like it kind of did during the summer. But yeah, we're gonna finish here soon, so.
So in the end, this will actually become part of my dissertation. So like I said, I look at freshwater food webs. So I look at the ecosystems, the animals, the organisms, and how things are affecting them. And this trip became kind of a ground truth. One of the things I look at is river otters. And so I was very interested in why do river otters have lots of lead and barium and other metals in their systems, but if you go to USGS, you don't see those things floating down the river. Well, they're obviously somewhere, and pretty much what I'm seeing is they're actually cycling through the food webs. So animals are eating each other and transporting these historic metals through the systems, and so the Wabash River is continuing to have issues that maybe we don't always see.
So we would like to thank all of these wonderful people for helping us out. Dr. Jen Latimer, the woman who gave us permission to do this, the department that we work under, the Earth and Environmental Systems Department, and Kathy's husband, Nick, who was our shuttle bunny for.
And Riley, who has also picked up samples and shuttled. We didn't put him on the slide, but I feel bad. I had to make sure I thank him too. He saw us at our worst. So our trip that we spent overnight was actually 80 miles. That's the longest we've been on the river in one stretch. And it was historic. And so if you guys have any questions for us, we'll be glad to answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
So your slides where there was a high level of cadmium, barium, and lead, and then when you hit limestone, it just dropped a lot. What accounts for that?
You know, I'm not sure. I have yet to explore that because I just get the data and I look at it. But It could be because the limestone will neutralize any acid in the water, and even though we see like a very neutral pH, it might be slightly acidic or slightly acidic for a river, so it could be neutral. And it suspends a little bit of those metals where the limestone will neutralize it and the metals won't be suspended anymore. That's what I'm thinking. There could be totally different ways, but that's just my idea of it right off the bat.
Okay.
Yes.
On to actually that one as well. But before this, I don't know if anybody else laughed that the boneyard happened to be in Darwin, Illinois. Stupid fish, Darwin. But so for this, I was actually going to ask if you had taken samples before and after the bedding change. And the reason I ask this is because iron, is pyrite. Pyrite's an accessory mineral to limestone. So you should see elevated pH, you should see elevated iron levels. So what was the pH like before and after, and what was the iron levels like before and after?
So the iron levels, as you saw, in the water at least, the sediment is pretty steady. It doesn't have any crazy fluctuations or anything above levels of concern. But as you saw the water, it was really high before Site 13, where the bottom change, and that went really low. The pH was within safe levels the whole time.
Okay.
So I have to run a test on it, see if there's a significant change anywhere, but there wasn't anything that stuck out to me just looking at it right away.
Because lead to galena, that's another accessory you would see, and it just makes you wonder, like pyrite, when you introduce pyrite to water, you make sulfuric acid. So curious.
Mm-hmm. And it could be, once we turn, so once you get past here, you start to see the historic mining where things like pyrite are exposed.
Yeah.
So up here, it wasn't happening. So a lot of things are based on the creeks too. So the creek systems that lead into the river are definitely an influx of different situations. And the Wabash watershed's a big watershed. It's a lot of water. So it's hard to tell exactly when and where things are coming.
Yes.
So the Asian carp, have they come up the Wabash from the Mississippi to the Ohio up the Wabash?
We think so, yeah. That's the hypothesis that people have, yeah.
I would say that's probably true because you see them lower, but not upper. So I do know people catch them in the upper. Purdue does a lot of work with the Asian carp in that upper area in Lafayette of the Wabash River, but they just are not as prevalent. Down here, if you get on the river, you're going to see them.
Yes.
You said there were some villains. Would you mind mentioning who you think?
The villains?
That was your word, I misunderstood you.
That was my word.
We're taking names.
So you have to remember, I have a different aspect. I do understand that cities and towns have to flourish. And I do understand that when you have a beautiful river, it can be a way to flourish. But it also can be a double-edged sword. So our new track for ISU is gorgeous. What did it do for the river?
Probably poured a lot of fertilizer.
So that's a villain. So, and I don't mean to pick on only Vigo County. Like I said, you see high levels of barium in Lafayette. Lafayette's painting beautiful murals along the river. What's a mural doing for the river? So it might raise awareness. It might make people think, okay, this is a great river. But, what would Sugar Creek? Sugar Creek has boating, boat rentals, and tubing, and all kinds of fun recreation things that you can do on Sugar Creek. What are those doing for that creek? So like I said, when I say villains, a lot of times my idea of a villain is different. But that's because my heart is the water.
Yes.
How did you know
where to put in and put out?
So we have this great book. Who wrote it? I forget his name.
Jerry Hay,
It's a
the River
guide.
Lorian.
So this book has everything you need to know if you're gonna get in that river at all, right? So it has, oh, this is a great takeout if you're in a canoe, but don't do it if you're in a boat because it's just a gravel thing. Or this is a good takeout, it's nice and paved and there's food nearby, whatever. So we just looked through that book, went about, okay, we want to do 50 miles, so we'll go from, he says there's a takeout here and there's a takeout here, and we just found them on our GPS and went there, and it was as easy as that.
Jerry Hayes from here. He's from Terre Haute.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He actually, I'm like a big fan. So he recently friended me on Facebook and I was like, oh my God. But yeah, so we used the River Lorian. We also used different things from the internet and just any takeouts and put-ins I could find, and any way that I could kind of map out what we were gonna do. And there was a few times that it was like, let's leave the car here and hope for the best, so.
So did you check out any of the tributaries?
We're very familiar with Vigo County tributaries.
I think it died.
So we look a lot at Coal Creek. I've also looked at Brulette Creek. I just recently collected crayfish in about 4 tributaries in Vigo County. And so when it comes to Vigo County, because it's close, I can get into the tributaries. But actually pulling water samples from the tributaries as we went down the river, we did not do.
But you never noticed any difference due to it? What I'm thinking is Crawfordsville above Sugar Creek, and there's a power plant in Crawfordsville. So that must not be affecting the quality of Sugar Creek a whole lot, because there's...
Oh, yes. So realize almost every river and creek system in Indiana has some form of impairment. So we've done better. The Wabash River is better, and we haven't lit it on fire yet, so we're not Indianapolis. So at least that part's a good thing. And we are improving. But there are still huge, significant impairments that need to be addressed. And historic impairments. So those are the things that I look at. So the things that we did in the 1970s are not gone. They're still here. They're still cycling through the water systems. They're still landing in the sediment, being taken up by plants, being eaten by the animals and fish, and moving right through the systems, going nowhere.
So having worked in agriculture, and I know they're still tiling fields, how bad do you see that?
The farmers are really good at hiding their tiles. Like they make these beautiful riprap banks. And then you notice the water flooding through them. So we do. We see quite a bit of tiles. We also see quite a bit of just, maybe they were historic ditches dug that are still there, and they're definitely still draining water. I know in Park County, when I drive here to Terre Haute, if it's raining or it's a recent rain, I see water moving through those ditches at 5 miles an hour. So it's flushing right to the river. Yes.
I know you said that you were limited on mussel collection. Who limits you and why?
I have a special collections permit from the Department of Natural Resources. Okay. So I got it specifically for this. I requested to be able to just pick up dead mussel shells. About, I think, 90% of the freshwater mussels in Indiana are at least of special interest, if not endangered. And so even picking up the dead shells is an issue.
Is the shell supposed to be there for like reclamation because of like calcium?
I would imagine it's there for reclamation, but it's also there, like you see, when you're out on the river, you see mussel shells for mussels that are extirpated from the state. They're not here anymore. And that shell has probably been in the river 30 years floating around and landed on a point bar. But it's a historic record, I guess, at this point.
Grant Fisher was here last night, and he spoke to that a little bit. He said that in the 1991 or so, that they started regulating that collection of mussels and mussel shells. And the mussel shells, it was more to have a mechanism, I guess, to stop people from collecting vast quantities of them.
Yeah.
So if they saw people with, a bucket of mussel shells, then they would be able to investigate and say you can't collect them. He said they're not necessarily out there to stop. A little kid goes by the river and picks up a shell. They're not going to, find them or whatever. But it was more if someone has quantities of them, because that's what had happened historically. People were collecting them for the button industry and the pearl industry and stuff.
Well, in every shell you take out, you're taking out calcium that another shell can't use. And so, obviously the water has metals that shouldn't be in the system, but it also has some issues with metals that should be in the system. So magnesium, calcium, things that organisms need to function. And the more that we remove the things that they need to function, the less we have of them.
Well, a lot of those are natural buffers too.
Absolutely.
So if you remove the buffer, the hard stuff is, free to run around. You don't have calcium carbonate to go slap around, acidity. You don't create bicarbonate.
And we absolutely have some lower pH water running into the systems. Most of the creeks that go into the Wabash River are ephemeral, so they only flow water sometimes. And so the pH of that water gets pretty low. In fact, Coal Creek has some issues with historic mining and has pHs as low as 4, which means it's absolutely dissolving rocks, absolutely dissolving metals, and absolutely impacting the Wabash River.
If you've ever come across Coal Creek, you'll know it's Coal Creek because it's like
orange.
It looks like you ground up like a fruit orange and made a whole creek out of that. It's thick, you could see the iron precipitate because there's just so much acid in the water. That was COVID summer. We walked through creeks because we couldn't be in the lab. And so I walked through Coal Creek and Clear Creek and Sand Creek, all that. And I would leave with my muck boots being stained orange from Coal Creek.
So where we see that out here, west of Green Valley, Mine Pond, along roads, even the water is orange like that.
Absolutely. So Little Sugar Creek is definitely still being impacted by the historic mining and acid mine drainage. In fact, when you're on the Wabash River and Little Sugar Creek has a nice water flow coming in, you can see iron precipitate all the way to the Wabash coming into the river. And if you are in the Wabashiki area and Little Sugar Creek coming through, we've collected macroinvertebrates in that area and they're definitely impaired. So we collected crayfish, like I said, in 4 different creeks. We found 5 crayfish in Little Sugar Creek area, whereas normally we find 30 to 40 crayfish. So definitely an issue.
Any other questions? Oh, thank you.